was born and raised in a small town in Clovelly, a small community in southwest England. My city basically survives through fishing, and there's a very common saying amongst the fishermen there. Fisherman's tale is an expression used to name tall tales or absurd lies told by someone. As you must have already guessed, it's named so because fishermen usually tell stories about giant fish they caught or some fantastical creature they saw in the ocean. My dad used to be a fisherman, so I guess I can say I really heard lots of those. My family was really poor. Actually, the whole small microscopic fishing town we lived in was really poor. Despite that, I can't really say that I had a bad childhood. On the contrary, actually. Sure, we had our share of difficulties, but we had a simple life, and I never even came close to starving as a child. As I already said, Dad was a fisherman. Mum was a school teacher. The two of them always incentivized me to study really hard, which I still do to this very day. Especially Dad, who couldn't read at all. He had a very difficult life, and I won't be getting into any details with that. Not because I don't want to, but because he barely ever spoke about his younger days, which leads me to believe he went through some really tough stuff. But still, he always had a smile on his tanned face. Whenever he'd take his fishing trips with his fellow fishermen, he'd tell me one of his fisherman's tales. It was usually about some trouble he went through in the high seas, or something else he'd heard of. I think that's how he tried to tell me stories, so I could sleep easy before he left early in the next morning. And since he couldn't do the usual, grab a fairy tale book and read your kid to sleep thing, I guess he just made up his own stories. I also think it was his way to say some sort of goodbye, since his fishing ventures took from 3 to 4 days, and you'd never know if there was an accident or not. Anyway, I knew better than to believe in sea dragons or colossal tuna fish, but I never complained. I always loved his tales, no matter how absurd they were. I had my own Errol Flynn at home, always with some fantastic adventure to talk about. When I got old enough, he took me to the sea with him on some weekends. I think that's what made me fall in love with the sea life. So much we didn't know, literally right beneath our feet. So much mystery under those blue, deep waters. I became fascinated with it. Dad agreed with me about the mysteries when I first talked to him, which led me to believe I was going to end up as another tale of his. But instead, he said nothing else, and looked at the sea with distant but shaken eyes. "I guess it runs in the family," he muttered in a sad melancholy. It sounded more like he was talking to himself instead of talking to me. I found it strange, but thought nothing of it at the time. There was this one day, though, that made me think about that look in his eyes. Or rather, every single look of his, but more specifically that one. There was a subtle emotion that didn't really fit with my dad's usual sunny personality. I remember it all too well. I was 16 at the time, and I'd already decided I wanted to become a biologist. The local school had grown due to a government program. I was pretty sure there was something weird about that, but made no big deal of it. I had better education and a real shot at life because of it, so it didn't matter. I was the best student at the school at the time, since I was dedicating myself to getting into a good university in any way I could. That night, at dinner, Dad was acting weird. He was silent. Usually, he'd always be telling Mum jokes, making her slam the table as she laughed. But not that night. That night, he kept quiet, with a shocked look on his face, almost as if he'd seen a ghost. He was going to leave on one more of his fishing ventures at high seas the next morning, so I expected a tale. Nothing. When we finished dinner, he kissed Mum very softly on her cheek, almost as if he was saying his last goodbyes. I made my way to bed, very puzzled with his attitude, when he followed me up to my bedroom, which was getting cramped now with books from the school's library. I felt a little bit better, as his tales always put a smile on his face, and mine. But when he started speaking, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I know it sounds strange, a 16-year-old boy still having his father telling him bedtime stories. However, Dad and me really bonded through that. His tales became more and more elaborate as I spoke to him about literature. He and I would always laugh together, and, well, I couldn't ever let go of that. "Tale time, isn't it, boy?" he said in a melancholic way. "Is everything all right, Dad?" I asked as I sat in my bed. "Yeah, I'm just thinking, that's all," he answered in a distant way. I knew he was lying. I just didn't know why at the time. "There's a tale I wanted to tell you when you grew older. My dad told me this one." I was taken aback a little. Dad barely ever spoke of Grandpa, who died when Dad turned 19. That was new. I wanted to know more about Dad's story, even just a tiny bit. This was my chance. I sat up and listened carefully. "Have you ever heard the tale of the singing fish?" he asked. I shook my head in denial. That was definitely not how he told his stories. As I said before, he nearly always made them up. So to have one that was already ready, that was big news. They say that this tale is as old as the first boat made by man. A tale that might as well be true. You said it yourself, that the sea holds many mysteries. It's said that deep in the sea lives a form of fish that was born to trick sailors. One so diabolical that it makes the biggest of sharks look friendly. They call it the singing fish. As silly as it sounds, the singing fish is the most dangerous thing to ever come to life. It has a tail like a dolphin. You know, fins to the sides. He was talking about the horizontal fins, I thought. I found it strange. It wasn't unheard of to see dolphins off the coast of southwest England due to the warm waters, that's true, but nowhere near where the people of my town went fishing. So how did his dad know that? More importantly, singing fish. I grew more and more confused, but shook my thoughts from my head as Dad went on with his tale. They have long tails and an upper body that looks almost human, but covered in dark blue scales. My father told me they even have arms and hands, with 6 fingers each. He also told me they have long hair and an appearance close to a woman's. Also, a big mouth filled with long, thin, and very sharp teeth. But the most dangerous feature is its voice. Its voice? I asked skeptically. Fish don't have voices, I thought to myself. A fisherman would know that very well too. Yes, its voice, Dad calmly answered. A female voice. A very beautiful voice that can't be forgotten. One so beautiful that it messes with your head. You may hear it once, but never twice. Whoever has an encounter with it vanishes in the ocean, along with the boat and whoever is with them. They say that men are hypnotized by the voice and are taken down to the water to be eaten by the singing fish and its children. Dad finished his unusual story with a grim look on his face. I was scared, not because of the mermaid story, but because of his eyes, and the fact that he was telling something of a horror story, which he never did. After that, he patted me on the shoulder and then hugged me. "You get to sleep in now, okay? You got a long way ahead of you and lots of books to read," Dad said, his voice cracking a bit, almost as if he was about to cry. I hugged him back, trying to comfort him somehow, worried if something was happening and I didn't know about it. Maybe Mum and Dad were splitting up. Maybe he was in debt. Maybe something happened to the boat. I couldn't tell. And that's what scared me the most. I couldn't get any sleep that night, thinking about Dad's strange attitude. I could even hear Dad leaving the house to get to the boat at 5 a.m. He was completely silent, respecting the sea's constant sound. And just like that, he never came back. It was Tuesday when he left. The weather was perfect, not a single cloud in the sky. And it remained like that for the next 6 days. After the 4th day of waiting, I could hear Mum cry herself to sleep. I went to the small wharf where his boat would always dock, every single day. The people in the town soon began to speak about it. 6 days after he left, someone saw something float in the water, slowly being carried to the beach. It was a huge piece of wood. A piece of a boat, more specifically. On it, in weathered paint, the name Medusa was painted in dark green. It was Dad's boat. Whatever was left of it anyway. Dad was gone. The shock was so great that I had no reaction. I didn't cry when they placed a memorial grave at the cemetery, burying a piece of Dad. I didn't cry when Mum held me, or when she cried at home. All I could think of was how Dad's eyes were changed before he left to never come back. Years passed, and with a lot of effort, I managed to pass the entrance exam for Oxford University. I had to move to Oxford, a very posh and well-off region to the east. Mum had a relative there, so I moved in with her. She was really proud and cried a lot. People even threw me a party the day before I left. When I began studying there, my life changed completely. I studied so much, I barely had time to sleep. And you know what? I loved it. I was absolutely fascinated with everything I learned every day. Near the end of the course, we started to begin field research. Since I was specialising in sea life, my classmates and I travelled to the ocean. It was going to be a 22-day trip on the high seas, and I was very excited. It kind of reminded me of when Dad used to take me there on the weekends. By then, I'd started to ignore the memory of that particular tale, making room of the fond memories I had of him. When we got to the sea, we started researching right away. Nothing other than the usual. Samples of zooplankton, deep sea fish, and even sea turtles if we got lucky. We also had a lot of fun in the ship, making fun of those that got sick in the first 3 days into sea. It was all great, until the night of the 5th day. We were discussing part of our research until we kind of lost track of time. After seeing it was 2 a.m, we decided we needed to sleep. It was a tiring trip, since we had to stay in the boat's built-in lab most of the time. I was about to fall asleep when one of my colleagues came next to my bed and sprung me awake, shaking me. "Hey, do you hear that?" he whispered. Oh great, he had no problem waking me up, but waking up the others was completely out of the question. "Heard what?" I answered, kind of groggy, profoundly irritated. "This humming," There's someone singing," he whispered again. He sounded thrilled and excited, which was not only strange, but a bit creepy. "Dude, go to sleep. It's really late," I said, rolling to the opposite side. I heard nothing other than someone snoring and the subtle sound of the water touching the boat's sides. He shook me again, this time more vigorously. I was about to tell him to get lost when I actually heard a distant voice too, humming some tune. It was a beautiful female voice, a nice baritone. That not only sprung me out of my lethargic and sleepy state, but also rang all of the danger alarms in my head. Something was way, way off here. I knew everyone in that boat for years now, and no one there knew how to sing, especially not the girls. I got up and held his shoulder as he tried to go outside. "Don't go outside," I said in a surprisingly desperate tone. I didn't hold my voice back and didn't notice how loud I was. Everyone else woke up, mostly complaining about how it was too late for pranks or games. They all stopped complaining when the voice began to sing instead of humming. My heart began to pound. No, wasn't that just a fisherman's tale? A lie? A story just to inflate the teller's ego? Just an urban legend? "Hey, who's singing? Did someone leave music playing or something?" one of the girls asked, in a sleepy yet surprised tone. "No," said another girl. "The sound's coming from outside. Who's singing?" Everyone quickly looked around to see if everyone was inside the room. It turned out as expected. Everyone was in there. I began to shake with fear. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I had to do something. I finally understood the weight of the usual commonly told legends. Sometimes, even the tallest tales might be true. After all, they had to come from somewhere, right? The singing grew louder. My thoughts began to grow fuzzy as the melody of that beautiful voice kept growing more and more emotional. My thoughts began to grow too peaceful to be natural in that situation. I began to feel more and more scared because of that. But my body was starting to give signs it'd soon stop obeying my commands. "We should go look," someone said. "No, we have to stay inside. Don't listen. Whatever you do, don't listen. Please," I screamed, moving towards the doorway, trying to block the way out. I didn't notice how I was limping and struggling to speak until the words came out of my mouth. I was drenched in cold sweat. "Why should we listen to you?" the guy who woke me up asked, in a distant tone. His eyes were mesmerized as he looked at the doorway. "She's calling out to me. Can't you hear her?" "You don't understand. Please don't go out there." My thoughts began to grow fuzzier by the second. The singing kept getting louder and louder. It was so beautiful, so heartfelt, so sensual. I could feel it. I could almost see a beautiful brunette mermaid singing in the water, singing my name, waiting for me under the moon. No, the singing fish was getting to me too. It was messing with my head, and I could do nothing but try to resist, and I was starting to fail. The singing was too loud not to listen anymore. "What's going on? What is this?" one of the girls asked. She didn't sound mesmerized at all. She sounded sick to her stomach and profoundly confused. I slapped myself in the face and I saw her cover her ears slightly. "What's happening?" "Why am I having these thoughts?" one of the guys asked. They were asking me that. I knew the answer, although I didn't want to accept what it was. I no longer felt fear. I knew what was going to happen to me. The same thing that happened to my dad. The same thing that happened to his dad. "What's going on?" the confused girl asked me again, demanding me to spill what I knew about that singing. That beautiful, yet horrifying singing. That beautiful baritone from the sea. With a sad acceptance, I opened my mouth, mimicking a few of Dad's last words. I felt like I'd see him again soon, that I'd be at peace, right beside him in the ocean. Have you ever heard the tale of the singing fish? That was the last thing I remember about that night. Afterwards, I remember waking up to a harrowing amount of pain throughout my entire body in a hospital on the coast. The nurses said I was found half dead by a fishing boat, floating around the wreckage of the one I was in. Nothing, nor anyone else, was found. They seemed surprised when I asked about the others on the boat. No one believes my story. Hell, because of it, I was sent to this specialist psychiatric clinic. They think I hallucinated the events and that the boat sunk because of a gas leak or some other lie. It's funny, however, how they seem unable to make up another fisherman's tale to explain the disappearances of both my legs, my left hand, and of my colleagues. Since their families and the university's professors began to poke around. The police even came to visit me. They didn't really believe me either. They might not believe me or even try to shut me up, but I know better than to stay quiet. I know what I saw and heard that night. I know what happened to my dad, and I know that someone else out there knows what's going on. I know it was all real. Sometimes I still listen to the singing. Sometimes I swear they're calling out to me, even though I'm so far from the sea now. They remember, and so do I.